Yes. Now, from that I'll have to go to a few other points to be clear about Lenin and Leninism. You see, when you speak about Lenin, you'll have to speak about Lenin also in his contributions. Up to now I spoke about Lenin as a tactician and Lenin as a strategist of the Russian labor movement. Now I speak of Lenin as an international figure. Now I believe, of course, the main thing that people can learn from Lenin is quite simply to learn the strategy and the tactics and the approach in strategy and tactics. Now the question of the method. In the same way that when you approach Marx, the truth is what Marx wrote about historical materialism is only one page. In the introduction to the critique of political economy. And from that, if you think you are becoming a Marxist, once you learn this page by heart, you are wrong. You have to learn the whole of Marx, in other words, the tens of thousands of pages in which he uses the materialist method in explaining the real world. This is absolutely clear. In the same applies to Lenin. Lenin is not a book that will teach you Lenin's tactics or Lenin's strategy. You have to go again and again and again, and the capacity of Lenin to adapt himself to the basic assumptions, really, that the emancipation of the working class is the act of the working class, and therefore the party has to be judged by the extent that it raises the activity, the self-confidence, and the consciousness of the class. It is not a criterion. It is no criterion of judging a revolutionary organization, except in terms of consciousness, activity, and confidence of the class. But once you say that it's so flat, that unless you really go for Lenin, you really doesn't get flesh and blood. And that's why I find it sound difficult really speaking about Lenin, because there's such a lot there. But I will speak now about Lenin, not what we can learn from him in terms of Russian tactics and Russian strategy that we can transfer here, or to learn something about the method approach. I'll speak specifically about Lenin and what did he say about world capitalism and the world labor movement. And I believe that one of the most important things of Lenin is that he shifted the socialist movement from being a movement European-oriented to being really a world movement. When you look to the first international, what was the first international made of? British, French, Belgian, Italians, Poles, etc., etc., etc. Only Europeans. When you look to the second international was only Europeans with the addition of the Japanese Socialist Party. When you look to the criterion of the world, the attitude to the world was naturally, in the case of the first international, was West European orientated. It meant that India appeared as an object of history. India appeared as a problem. India didn't appear as a movement, as a subject of history. And that's why you find Friedrich Engels in 1893 writing to Kautsky, and he says to Kautsky, you ask me what we will do with India after the socialist revolution in Europe. And Engels says, we will leave them to stew in their own juice. Now when you think about it, and this was in 1893, I'm not speaking about 1848. You know, I think about late in 1893. Now the great thing, the first important thing about Lenin, we have to say that he shifted it completely. He spoke about a world movement. And the world movement means that when we discuss the national question, it is no more the national question of the Poles only, or the Irish only, or of the South Slavs only. We speak of the Italians only. We speak now about the national question as a world question. In other words, the important thing about Lenin's imperialism of 1916 and the important thing about Lenin's speeches to the Second Congress of the Communist International was that for him, for the first time really, the world is a world. And because it is a world, a unified world, the underdeveloped countries, the colonial countries, appear now as a subject of history and not only as an object of history. Now this is very, very important, because one of the greatest tragedies that quite often happens to people, because we only touch a lot to Lenin, we sometimes take it for granted and we simply say, you know what, let's look at the question to what extent the world has changed between 1916 and 1970. Now I'm actually convinced it is terribly important to see to what extent the world has changed between 1916 and 1970. But it is even more, not less important to remember to what extent the world changed between 1916 and 1893, the last statement of Engels on the world. This is terribly important. Now the fact that all of us now take it for granted is to a large extent really owed, very much so, to the Lenin's, not only Lenin's imperialism, but Lenin's articles on the subject and so on. And when he speaks about imperialism, again the method is important. If you look at the little book, Lenin's Imperialism, you know, the little book that he tried to be, as usual, not very, very impressive. He doesn't try to impress you, to knock you down with his knowledge. On the contrary, for example, you'll find his original book, original notebook is very, very impressive, this original notebook. There are more than 800 pages. In these 800 pages, there are 148 books are summed up, 232 articles are summed up. From those more than 800 pages that cover so many books and so many articles, he summed 20 to 25 pages that he sums into his little books, and he refers only to 4 or 5 books with a couple of articles. Now he doesn't try to impress you, but nevertheless one central thing that's very interesting in this book. The first 3 chapters is about the internal contradictions in the advanced capitalist countries. In other words, he doesn't start with the relation between the advanced countries and the backward countries. He starts, the first 3 chapters are what happens in the industrial world, in the industrial capitalist world. How free competition leads to monopolies, etc., etc., etc. And only in chapter 4, he moves from the internal contradiction to the relation between those advanced countries and the countries that imperialism exploits, export capital, etc., etc., etc. Now even this method is terribly important in understanding really how you approach questions from Bolivia to question of Vietnam, etc. You have to start first off from the unity of the world capitalism. And you have to start from the subordination of the backward countries to the needs of imperialism, and not the other way around. You start from the heart, and the heart of capitalism is in Britain, in the United States, in France, in Germany, etc. And the periphery, the part that is exploited, is smashed, is ruined, and being exploited, can be explained only in terms of the internal mechanism. Now this is important, because many of the Marxists so much take it for granted that when they start analyzing Bolivia on its own, or Vietnam on its own, and so on, without remembering, first of all, you have to start with Britain, and the United States, of course, I'm not trying to say only Britain, and so on, and then go to the question of the periphery. Now, I'll go again, I say, the problem with Lenin is this, that because for him, the working class was the agents of revolution change, always when he spoke about the national question, or he spoke on the colonial question, he spoke always in the terms, in the final blow, it will be in Britain. Therefore, you always, from your one statement I remember of his, he says, we will come to London and Berlin, through Shanghai and Bombay. The enemy is always London. It is not Bombay. It is not Shanghai. Of that time, it is London, because London is the center of world capitalism. Now this is very, very important in the methodology, because although he looked to the colonial movement, to the national movement, to the peasant movement as eyes, he never forgot that eyes of whom? Eyes of the industrial working class, not a power on its own, and not a power that is separated in terms, that it can act on its own and liberate on its own. It can only act as a part of a general alliance in which the working class is the center. I'm sorry that I have to repeat those things, but I think otherwise Leninism means nothing. I'll go from there and I'll speak about 2 other points before I'll bore you to tears, perhaps I bore you to tears, and now is on 2 things. First of all, Lenin's last battle, and then Lenin as the artist of the revolution. And I'll try to explain what I mean by that. First of all, about Lenin's last battle. Because of the lots and lots of stories that are spread around about Leninism lead to Stalinism, there is nothing more revealing, as a matter of fact, is to read Lenin's last few articles. The last few years of Lenin's life were really the most tragic years of Lenin. And you know why? Because if the agent of the revolution change is the working class, what happens when the working class is decimated? And you see, Lenin saw it, that the Russian working class was decimated. In 1920, during the trade union discussion, there were 3 lines in the party. There was Trotsky that said, we have a worker state. If we have a worker state, then the trade union should be subordinated to the worker state. Then the workers should be mobilized, like an army, soldiers, because it is our state. Full stop. A worker state, the trade union should be subordinated to the worker state. The trade union should be statified. Then there was the ultra-left, Shelyapnikov. Trotsky was the right wing, there's no question about it. There was Shelyapnikov on the same question. He said, we have a worker state. Because we have the worker state, we have to trade unionize the state. Trotsky said, let the trade unions wither away. Shelyapnikov said, let the state wither away. Lenin was standing in the middle and he said, what are you talking about? You speak about the worker state, that's an abstraction. The real world, struggle is in the real world, not in abstraction. Don't talk abstraction, talk real. And what is the real world? You say we have a worker state, you're talking rubbish. We have the old Tsarist machine, covered red. The bureaucracy is running amok. We have the thing that he coined, we have communist lies. We have raggish communists. Reddish communist is